Welcome to Catholic Shrine Basilica YouTube channel. Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht, Netherlands. Introduction. The Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht is a Romanesque church in the historic center of Maastricht, Netherlands. The church is dedicated to Our Lady of the Assumption and is a Roman Catholic parish church in the Diocese of Roermond. The church is often referred to as the Star of the Sea, after the church's main devotion, Our Lady, Star of the Sea. The present-day church is probably not the first church that was built on this site. However, since no archaeological research has ever been carried out inside the building, nothing certain can be said about this. The church's site, inside the Roman castrum and adjacent to a religious shrine dedicated to the god Jupiter, suggests that the site was once occupied by a Roman temple. It is not unlikely that the town's first church was built here and that this church in the 4th or 5th century became the cathedral of the Diocese of Tongeren-Maastricht. Sometime before the year 1100 the church became a collegiate church, run by a college of canons. The canons were appointed by the Prince Bishop of Liège. The provosts were chosen from the chapter of St. Lambert's Cathedral, Liège. The chapter of Our Lady's had around 20 canons, which made it a middle-sized chapter in the Diocese of Liège. Until the end of the chapter in 1798 it maintained its strong ties with Liège. Parishioners of Our Lady were identified in old documents as belonging to the Familia Sancti Lombardi. It is clear that the chapter of Saint Servatius was the more powerful institution in Maastricht, with strong ties to the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, but throughout the Middle Ages the two churches remained rivals. Most of the present church was built in the 11th and 12th centuries. Construction of the imposing west work started shortly after 1000 AD. In the 13th century the nave received Gothic vaults. Around 12th century the canons abandoned their communal lifestyle, after which canons' houses were built in the vicinity of the church. History of Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht. In the 14th century a parish church was built next to the collegiate church, so the main building could be reserved for the canons' religious duties of this parish church, dedicated to Saint Nicholas. Very little remains as it was demolished in 1838. Apart from St. Nicholas Church, the parish made use of 3 other chapels dedicated to Saint Hilarius, Saint Evergistus, and Saint Mary Minor. In the mid-16th century the present late Gothic cloisters replaced the earlier cloisters. After the incorporation of Maastricht in the French First Republic in 1794, the town's religious institutions were dissolved in 1798. Many of the church treasures were lost during this period. The church and cloisters were used as a blacksmith shop and stables by the military garrison. This situation continued until 1837 when the church was restored to the religious practice. This coincided with the demolishing of St. Nicholas Church and the transfer of the parish to Our Lady's. From 1887 to 1917 the church was thoroughly restored by well-known Dutch architect Pierre Cuypers. Cuypers basically removed everything that did not fit his ideal of a Romanesque church. Parts of the east choir, the 2 choir towers, and the south aisle were almost entirely rebuilt. The church was elevated to the rank of minor basilica by Pope Pius XI on 20 February 1933. The building is largely Romanesque in style and is considered an important example of the Mousson group of churches that are characterized by massive west works and pseudo-transepts. Our Lady's in Maastricht indeed has a tall, massive west work and 2 pseudo-transepts on each side. The west work, built of carbonic sandstone, dates from the early 11th century and is flanked by 2 narrow towers with marlstone turrets. Some spolia, probably from the former Roman castrum of Maastricht, were used on the lower parts of the west work. The nave with its transept and pseudo-transepts largely dates from the second half of the 11th century. The church has 2 choirs and 2 crypts. The east choir dates from the 12th century and is decorated with carved Romanesque capitals. The east crypt is a century older. During the building campaign, the original plan for the eastern part of the church was abandoned and a new scheme, based on the newly finished choir of St. Lambert's Cathedral, Liège, adopted. The current, heavily restored choir towers are roofed with Rhenish helms of stone rather than shingling. One of the towers, named after Saint Barbara, was used for storage of the city archives and the church treasury. Architecture of Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht. Architectural style, Romanesque architecture. A 13th-century Gothic portal, rebuilt in the 15th century, provides access to the church from Onze-Lieve-Vrouw Weplein. It is also the entrance of the so-called Marode Chapel, or Star of the Sea Chapel. Although the interior of the church underwent many changes throughout the centuries, it has an authentic Romanesque feel to it. This is largely due to the restoration ideas of the architect Pierre Kuipers, who had several of the larger Gothic windows replaced by small Romanesque windows, thus creating a darker, mystical atmosphere. Kuipers also removed the white plastering of the late Baroque period and had several altars built in a Romanesque or Gothic revival style. Despite all these changes, the turbulent history of the building is still legible. Some murals dating from the Middle Ages have survived, including one of Saint Catherine from the 14th century. A mural on a pillar of Saint Christopher and the infant Jesus dates from 1571. The large ceiling painting in the choir is neo-Romanesque and dates from the Kuipers restoration. All stained glass windows are from the 19th or 20th century. The furnishing of the church interior has followed the fashion of the time but suffered badly during the years of desecration, 1798 to 1837. In 1380 the church had 33 altars, but most of the medieval church inventory got lost in the turbulence that followed the arrival of the French in 1794. A precious baptismal font by the Maastricht metalworker Aert van Tricht survived but was stripped of most of its ornaments. Several Baroque confessionals and a richly carved pulpit were taken over from a former nearby Jesuit church. The 18th-century Baroque altar, now in the southern transept, is from the former Church of St. Nicholas. The large pipe organ was built in 1652 by André Séverin. The architectural sculpture in the interior of the Basilica of Our Lady belongs to the highlights of Mousson art. The 20 highly symbolic capitals in the choir ambulatory depict scenes from the Old Testament, as well as various kinds of animals, monsters, birds, naked or scarcely dressed humans entangled in foliage, and humans fighting with animals. One capital in particular is famous as it was signed Hymo, probably by its maker, who may also be represented on it, handing over a capital to the Virgin Mary. The carved capitals and corbels of the choir gallery, as well as the capitals in the nave, are of a slightly later date and less vivid, depicting mainly foliage with some human and animal figures. Most of the carved capitals, as well as some important reliefs elsewhere in the church, date from the second half of the 12th century. A close relationship has been established between the Romanesque sculpture in Our Lady's and that in the Basilica of Saint Servatius in Maastricht, the Church of St. Peter in Utrecht, and the Schwarz-Rheindorf Double Chapel in Bonn. Our Lady of Maastricht, Star of the Sea. Sterre der Zee is the popular name of a 15th-century grace statue of Mary in Maastricht. The Roman Catholic Sterre der Zee devotion is particularly popular in the southern Netherlands and Belgium. The papal crowned statue of Maastricht is set up in a side chapel of the Onze-Lieve-Vrouw Basilica, a church that is for this reason referred to as the Sterre der Zee. The veneration of Mary in Maastricht is much older than the veneration of the Star of the Sea. Both the Sint-Servaaskerk and the Onze-Lieve-Vrouw Kerk used to have altars dedicated to Mary. In the latter church is the 12th-century Hymo capital, on which the sculptor offers a beautifully worked capital to Mary, an early sign of Marian devotion in Maastricht. The oldest surviving statue of Mary in Maastricht is a Cetus Sapientiae from Moslin from around 1275 in the Sint-Servaaskerk. In 1281 a chapel on the Meuse is mentioned, which Maria Minor, Mary the Less, was mentioned. The designation lesser in this case could indicate a subordination of the chapel to the chapter of the Church of Our Lady, Maria Major. Later the name was changed to Maria ad Litem, Maria ten Oevier. The image of the Star of the Sea is a typical 15th century Madonna and Child. It is not known exactly where and when it originated. Around 1470 it was donated by the nobleman Nicholas van Harlaar to the Maastricht Friars Minor when he entered the monastery. From that time on it stood in a chapel on the south side of the choir of the Oud Minderbroederskerk. The popular devotion to the statue of Mary probably arose in the first quarter of the 16th century. In 1532, the annual Easter Monday procession from the Minderbroederskerk was mentioned in the Maastricht Sigil book, in which that Bijelt van Onser prefer women was carried along. After the capture of Maastricht by Alexander Farnese in 1579, the Recatholicization began and a golden age began for the Franciscans and their Marian devotion. The monastery became a true place of pilgrimage, especially after some miraculous healings and 4 letters of indulgence granted, in 1607, 1614, 1628 and 1646. In 1609, the Maastricht Franciscan Henricus Sedulius describes in his book Diva Virgo Maastrichtensis, the Divine Virgin of Maastricht, the Marian devotion in his monastery, in which he recalls some miraculous healings. The procession on Easter Monday attracted thousands of participants, in 1608 about 6,000 men, excluding women and children, in 1611 some 20,000. Henricus Sedulius gave a vivid description of the events of the Easter week of 1608. The sometimes ecstatic scenes are strongly reminiscent of the contemporary Semana Santa processions in Spain and South America, where many of these traditions have been preserved. On Easter Saturday the image of the Star of the Sea was first removed from the altar, after which it was placed on Easter Sunday before the still present choir screen was placed in the church. Here the people flocked, often shabbily dressed, sometimes barefoot, to worship the statue. Some crawled around it on their knees or threw themselves flat on the ground in penance. This went on all night. The prayer path was also walked, individually or in groups, some with burning torches. Some also got on their knees. The highlight was the penitential procession on Easter Monday, after High Mass, where all the notables of the city were present. A priest with the processional cross led the way, surrounded by a crowd, some also with a cross. Then followed the Brotherhood of the Scourges, led by the Jesuits, later the Dominicans, many in sackcloth, barefoot and with covered faces. In 1608 more than 1,000 penitents went with them. After the second processional cross, all the religious of the city, Capuchins, Beaugarden, Croziers, Augustinians, Dominicans, and Friars Minor. Then followed the Star of the Sea, carried on a procession bar by 4 friars and surrounded by the Brotherhood of the Flame Bearers. Near the statue walked dozens of penitents in iron armor with only a loincloth underneath, sometimes with heavy chains at their ankles. Their linen loincloths were soaked with the blood from the chafing of the armor. All the following week, penitents continued to walk the prayer path individually or in groups. On Beloken Easter, the following Sunday, the procession was repeated thinly. The heyday of the Star of the Sea devotion came to an end with the banishment of the Friars Minor after the so-called Treason of Maastricht, 1638, in which the Friars Minor, among others, would have spied for the Spaniards. The statue went through a confusing period of wandering and eventually found shelter in the Minderbroederklooster in Tomeren, from where it did not return until 1675. No prayer paths or Star of the Sea processions are known from that period of exile. Feast Day, 19th March. Annual Feast Day of Our Lady of Maastricht held on 19th March. Feast of Saint Servatius, patron saint of Maastricht. The city procession is held on the Sunday after May 13th, in which all churches and Catholic groups and associations participate. The city procession moves from the Basilica of Saint Servatius to the Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht. Mass time. Weekdays: 9:10 a.m., 9:30 a.m. Saturdays: 9:30 a.m., 5 p.m. Sundays: 8:25 a.m., 8:45 a.m., 11 a.m. Church visiting time. Every days, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Contact info. Basilica of Our Lady of Maastricht. 7, Onze-Lieve-Vrouw Webline. 6211 HD, Maastricht, Netherlands. Website, www.steradairze.nl. How to reach the Basilica. Maastricht-Aachen Airport in Maastricht in Limburg, Netherlands is the nearby airport to the Basilica. Maastricht Railway Station in Maastricht in Limburg, Netherlands is the nearby railway station to the Basilica. If you wish to know more about Catholic shrine basilicas, Marian shrines and Marian apparitions, subscribe to our Catholic Shrine Basilica YouTube channel. Like and share with your loved ones. For more churches website www.catholicshrinebasilica.com.